She sang her way out of a two-bedroom house in rural Quebec, where 14 children shared the same walls, the same table, the same dream of something bigger. And she became the best-selling female artist in the history of recorded music. Then she signed a contract that made her the Queen of Las Vegas, put her name in lights above the most famous boulevard on earth, and set in motion a chain of events that would strip away her health, her husband, her brother, and finally, her voice. This is the story of how Celine Dion built the greatest solo residency in Vegas history, and how Vegas, the way Vegas always does, collected what it was owed. The girl from nowhere. To understand what Celine Dion sacrificed, you have to understand what she came from. Because nothing about her story was supposed to happen. Not the records, not the Oscars, not the stadiums, and certainly not Las Vegas. She was born on March 30th, 1968, in Charlemagne, Quebec, a small town 40 kilometers east of Montreal, where the winters are brutal and the options are few. She was the 14th child of Adhemar and Therese Dion. 14. Not a typo. 14 children in a house with 2 bedrooms, a piano in the living room, and a mother who believed that music was the only thing that could save you from the life you were born into. Therese was right. Celine could sing before she could properly speak in public. Shy, awkward, gap-toothed. A kid who stood out for all the wrong reasons at school, but came alive the moment a melody passed through her. The family ran a small piano bar called Le Vieux Baril, the Old Barrel. Little Celine performed there for tourists and locals who nursed cheap drinks and did not always pay attention. But she paid attention. She watched how music moved people, how it could turn a tired man at a bar stool into something softer, something open. At 12 years old, Celine and her mother wrote a song together, a demo tape. They did not know who to send it to. So Therese mailed it cold to René Angelil, the biggest music manager in Quebec, a man known for turning Canadian talent into something the world would notice. René almost did not listen. The tape sat on his desk, but something made him press play. And when he heard that 12-year-old voice coming through his speakers, he reportedly wept. What René Angelil did next is the part of the story that people don't talk about enough. He believed in Celine so completely, so absolutely, that he mortgaged his own house to finance her first album. He didn't ask for a percentage. He didn't hedge his bets. He put his roof, his family's security, everything he owned on a 12-year-old girl from Charlemagne. That's not management. That's faith. By the time Celine was 18, she was the biggest star in French Canada. By 20, she had won the Eurovision Song Contest representing Switzerland, standing on a stage in Dublin and singing a song called Ne partez pas sans moi to an audience of 600 million people. By the time she was 25, she was singing the theme to a Disney film. By 26, she was selling out arenas in countries that had never heard of Charlemagne, Quebec. The girl from nowhere had become the voice of everywhere, but she hadn't become herself yet. Not fully, because René was still building her, shaping her, deciding what Celine Dion would mean to the world. And somewhere in the process of building a star, the line between manager and husband, between mentor and controller, had blurred into something that nobody outside their circle could fully see. The deal that changed Vegas. The year was 2003. Las Vegas was transforming itself again. Steve Wynn had opened the Bellagio in 1998. The Venetian had arrived. Mandalay Bay, Paris, New York. New York. The Strip had gone corporate, polished, expensive. The mob was long gone, or at least invisible. The era of showroom legends, of Sinatra at the Sands and Liberace at the Riviera, felt like ancient history. Vegas needed a new kind of star. Something that could fill seats 5 nights a week for years at a time. Something that could compete with the spectacle of the mega resorts. Caesar's Palace needed a miracle, So they built one. Caesars had constructed a new purpose-built theater on the north end of the property. 4,000 seats, state-of-the-art acoustics, a stage designed to accommodate full theatrical production. They called it the Coliseum. And they needed a name to fill it that was so big, so undeniable, so beyond argument that nobody could look at a ticket price of $250 and blink. They needed Celine Dion. The deal they offered her was, at the time, the most lucrative entertainment contract in the history of Las Vegas. $500 million over 5 years, $100 million a year. She would perform 200 shows annually inside the Coliseum. The production budget alone was over $100 million. They built the stage around her voice. They designed the lighting for her face. Hundreds of crew members, dancers, musicians, set designers, all employed full-time, just to present one woman to the world, night after night, in a room that had been constructed specifically for her. Let that number sit with you for a moment. $500 million. In 2003, to put it in perspective, that was more than the construction cost of the Bellagio's original hotel tower, more than the entire gross domestic product of several small nations, more than anyone had ever paid a solo performer to stay in one place. Rene negotiated every dollar. He understood what Caesars needed, understood that they were not just buying Celine's voice, they were buying legitimacy. They were buying the proof that a Vegas residency was not a career endpoint. It was not where stars went to die quietly in sequence. It was where stars went to become something permanent. Rene made sure they paid for that distinction accordingly. The deal included profit-sharing arrangements, creative control clauses, approval over production decisions. Caesars was not just writing checks. They were handing over the steering wheel. Rene drove. Celine sang. And for a while, everything that happened next looked like the most successful gamble in the history of a city built entirely on gambling. A new kind of Vegas, A New Day Has Come, opened on March 25, 2003. And nothing about Las Vegas entertainment was ever quite the same again. The show was not a concert. It was not a revue. It was not a stand-up act with a band. It was something that had never existed before inside a Vegas showroom. It was a full theatrical experience built around a single human voice. Franco Dragone, the Belgian director who had transformed Cirque du Soleil into a global phenomenon, designed the production. Giant screens, aerial performers, water effects, fog and light choreographed to the millisecond. And at the center of all of it, a 40-year-old woman from Quebec who opened her mouth and made 4,000 people forget they were sitting in a casino. The reviews were not just good. They were stunned. Critics who had written off Vegas residencies as the last chapter in a career arrived at the Coliseum, braced for nostalgia, and left writing about the future of live entertainment. The New York Times called it extraordinary. Rolling Stone called it a genuine spectacle. And the ticket lines told the real story. Within 72 hours of going on sale, the first year of shows was sold out. The numbers that followed were staggering. A New Day Has Come ran from 2003 to 2007. Over the course of that residency, Celine performed over 700 shows. She grossed over $400 million in ticket sales alone, making it the highest-grossing residency in the history of live music up to that point. She sold out the Coliseum at an average attendance rate of 99%. Every other performer in Las Vegas watched what was happening at Caesars Palace and recalibrated what a residency could mean. Elton John took a residency. Rod Stewart, Bette Midler, Cher, Jerry Seinfeld. The model that Celine and Rene had negotiated in 2003 became the blueprint for every major act that followed. The modern Vegas residency, the one that Prince might have considered, that Bruno Mars built his career around, that Adele would eventually command. All of it traces back to what happened when a $500 million deal put Celine Dion in a room designed specifically for her voice. She had not just taken a job in Vegas. She had reinvented what Vegas could sell. But here is what none of the glowing reviews mentioned. Here is what the sold-out signs above the Coliseum did not say. 200 shows a year is not a schedule. It is a siege. It treats a human voice the way a coal mine treats a seam of rock. You extract from it until the extraction becomes damage, and the damage becomes permanent. Celine was singing herself toward a cliff, and nobody was telling her to slow down. The man behind the curtain. You cannot tell Celine Dion's story without telling Renee Angelil's story, because in many ways, they were the same story. Renee was born in Ottawa in 1942 to a Lebanese father and a French-Canadian mother. He had been a performer himself in the 1960s, a pop singer in a group called Les Baronets, a clean-cut act that rode the wave of Beatlemania through Quebec. When the wave broke, Renee transitioned into management. He discovered Jeanette Reno, one of the biggest stars in French Canada. He learned the music business from the inside, learned how a career was built and how it collapsed, learned that the manager who controls the narrative controls everything. When he mortgaged his house for Celine in 1980, he was 38 years old. She was 12. He managed her career. He shaped her image. He controlled her bookings, her recordings, her public statements, her wardrobe choices. He decided which songs she would sing and which opportunities she would take. He believed with a certainty that bordered on obsession that Celine Dion was the greatest voice of her generation, and that his job was to make the world understand what he already knew. In 1987, when Celine was 19 and Renee was 45, their professional relationship became something else. The details of how and when were kept private for years. Renee was married to someone else at the time. He had children. But by 1994, he and Celine married in a ceremony at the Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal that stopped traffic across the city and generated headlines across 2 continents. People had opinions. Of course, they did. A woman who had spent her entire life under the guidance of a man 26 years her senior, who had never had a manager who was not also her husband, who had never truly navigated the music industry or the world, or adulthood itself, without Renee making the calls. Some people called it a love story. Others called it something more complicated than that. What is not complicated is what Renee meant to Celine functionally. He was everything. Manager, husband, protector, navigator, decision maker. She performed. He calculated. She emoted. He negotiated. She was the voice. He was the machine that pointed the voice at the world. The Vegas deal was Renee's masterpiece, his greatest negotiation, his final proof that the kid from Charlemagne he'd bet his house on was worth every dollar he'd ever asked for her. But masterpieces have a price, and the person who always paid it was not Renee. The body starts keeping score. 200 shows a year sounds like a number until you understand what 200 shows a year does to a soprano's vocal cords, and until you understand what performing under theatrical lighting in a climate-controlled theater does to the delicate membranes that professional singers depend on the way surgeons depend on their hands. Celine pushed through the first residency on willpower and preparation, and the particular kind of discipline that only people who grew up with nothing and clawed their way to everything truly understand. She had vocal coaches, vocal rest protocols, humidifiers in her hotel suite, strict dietary regimens. She treated her voice the way an elite athlete treats a joint before competition, with constant maintenance and the quiet understanding that it would not last forever. But 200 shows a year does not care about maintenance. In 2012, 9 years into her relationship with the Coliseum, Celine began experiencing problems with her right ear. A virus had damaged a nerve. The condition affected her ability to hear certain frequencies properly, which meant her ability to pitch her voice accurately was compromised. For a singer of her technical standard, this was not an inconvenience. This was an existential threat. She canceled shows. Not many at first, but enough. The headlines noticed. Then came throat problems, inflammation that required surgical intervention, more cancellations. The tabloids started writing stories about Celine's health with that particular tone that entertainment media reserves for stars who are beginning to show cracks. Not sympathy, something colder, speculation. Here is what nobody in the audience wanted to acknowledge. Celine Dion was not an instrument that could be replaced or upgraded. She was a human being in her mid-40s who had been performing at maximum intensity for over 3 decades and at surgical precision for a decade straight in Las Vegas. The math of that was always going to arrive somewhere. The only question was when. She had a second residency at Caesar's Palace beginning in 2011. After a brief break following the first one, she came back because the money was still there. The machine needed feeding. Renee wanted her back on that stage, and honestly, the stage was the only place Celine Dion had ever fully understood herself. But her body was beginning to disagree. The second residency and the unraveling. By 2014, Renee Angelil was sick. Not the kind of sick that you manage around. The kind of sick that reorganizes everything. He had been diagnosed with throat cancer in 1999 and had beaten it then. When it returned in 2014, it returned harder, more aggressive. The kind of cancer that does not negotiate. He required intense treatment, surgery, radiation. He lost the ability to speak clearly. The man who had spent 40 years talking Celine's career into existence, negotiating every dollar, every contract, every creative decision, went silent. And Celine kept performing. This is the part of the story that is almost impossible to process without stopping and sitting with it. Renee was dying. Her husband of 20 years, the man who had shaped every day of her professional life, the man she had literally never worked without, was fading. And Celine Dion walked out onto that stage at the Coliseum, night after night, and sang. She wept during performances, openly. Not the theatrical emotion of a performer working an audience, but the raw, uncontrollable grief of a woman losing someone and having nowhere to put it except the only place she'd ever known how to put anything. She told interviewers that performing was the only thing that kept her sane, that the stage was the one place where the weight of what was happening at home became briefly, temporarily bearable. 4,000 people in the dark, the light on her face, the music lifting everything that could not otherwise be lifted. But there is something devastating in that logic, something that should make you uncomfortable, because what it says is that a woman in the middle of the worst experience of her life felt obligated to perform, felt unable to stop. Whether that obligation came from contract, from expectation, from the $500 million machine that had been built around her output, or from something inside her own psychology that Renee had spent decades constructing, the result was the same. She was breaking in public, and the show went on. The year everything died. 2016 arrived and took everything. Renee Angelil died on January 14th, 2016. He was 73 years old. He died at home in Henderson, Nevada, a few miles from the Coliseum he had helped build, surrounded by his family. Celine was with him. His funeral in Montreal drew thousands into the streets. The Notre Dame Basilica, the same church where they had married 22 years earlier, held his memorial service. Celine sat in the front row and held herself together in the way that people do when they have spent their entire lives learning to perform composure as a survival skill. 11 days later, her brother Daniel died of the same cancer. 11 days. There is no language that adequately addresses that. A husband and a brother, both to throat cancer, 11 days apart in January. The cruelty of that timing is the kind of thing that shakes a person's relationship with the idea of fairness. With God, if they believe in one. With the basic assumption that the universe operates by any logic at all. Celine went back on stage in March, 7 weeks after Renee died. When interviewers asked her why, she gave different versions of the same answer. That she had to. That Renee would have wanted it. That the music was the only thing that made sense. And here is where you have to hold two things at once, because both can be true. It can be true that Celine Dion genuinely found solace on that stage. And it can also be true that a woman who had been managed and directed and guided by one man from the age of 12 had no template for what to do with herself when that man was gone. That the stage was not just comfort. It was the only identity she fully understood. She had never not been performing. She had never built a life that existed separately from the machine Renee had constructed around her. The contracts continued because they had always continued. The shows went on because the shows had always gone on. But Renee was gone. And nobody was managing the machine anymore. Nobody was watching the instrument. Stiff person syndrome. In December 2022, Celine Dion posted a video to Instagram. She was sitting in a chair, she was crying, and she told the world that she had been diagnosed with something called stiff person syndrome. Most people had never heard of it. The medical community knows it as a rare neurological disorder that affects roughly 1 in a million people. It causes progressive muscle rigidity and debilitating spasms so severe they can fracture bones. It can cause the muscles of the torso to tighten involuntarily, making breathing difficult and movement agonizing. It is not curable. It is barely treatable. The medications that manage it carry significant side effects. And in Celine's case, it was affecting her throat and her diaphragm. The precise mechanical system that her entire career depended on. She had been experiencing symptoms for years. The muscle spasms, the difficulty walking, the unpredictable physical episodes had been quietly disrupting her life long before the world knew anything was wrong. She had been trying to manage it privately, the way performers manage everything that threatens their ability to perform, with silence and willpower, and the hope that the next treatment will be the one that fixes it. It was not fixed. The diagnosis explained the canceled shows that fans had found confusing in the years prior. It explained the physical stiffness that cameras had occasionally caught, the moments publicists had to manage. It explained why a woman who had performed with the physical abandon of a person fully inhabiting her body had begun to look, sometimes, like she was fighting her own muscles just to stand still. And here is the question that sits underneath all of this, like a concrete foundation nobody wants to examine. How much did the Vegas schedule contribute to what happened? Stress is not a minor variable in neurological illness. The relationship between sustained physical stress, immune function, and the kind of rare autoimmune adjacent conditions that include stiff person syndrome is not fully understood by medicine, but it is not dismissed either. A woman who performed 200 shows a year for the years, who pushed through grief, who continued performing through the death of her husband and her brother, who had never in her adult life been permitted by contract or by psychology to simply stop, does not emerge from that unchanged. Vegas extracted its value. It always does. The question is, just what currency it demands. The Reckoning, 2023. 2024. The tallies came in. The Courage World Tour, which had been announced in 2019 as the largest tour of Celine's career, was canceled, not postponed. Canceled. Over 1 million tickets had been sold across North America and Europe. The losses in revenue, in rescheduling, and in production costs already committed ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. She released a documentary called I Am Celine Dion in 2024. It was produced at her own instigation, her own decision to show the world what her life actually looked like now, without the lighting design, the stage, and the 4,000 people in the dark. What the documentary showed was hard to watch. Cameras captured a spasm episode that lasted several minutes. her body locked, her muscles seizing, her team surrounding her with a helplessness that was palpable through the screen. She was not performing. She was not managing a narrative. She was a woman in pain, trying to be honest about it in the only language she had ever known how to speak in, which was public. The documentary was praised. People called it brave, and it was brave, but it was also a reckoning. A woman who had given everything to a machine, looking directly at the camera and showing the world what everything looks like when it is gone. Then came Paris, the 2024 Olympic Games. The opening ceremony, July 26, 2024. The Eiffel Tower lit gold against the summer night. And on a platform above the Seine, Celine Dion stood and sang La Hymne à l'amour, the Edith Piaf standard, to the world. She had not performed publicly in over 4 years. She sang it perfectly. The internet stopped. People wept at their televisions in 200 countries. Athletes who had spent their entire careers training to be the best in the world at one thing paused at the edge of competition to watch a woman sing. It was the most watched moment of the Paris Olympics broadcast. And when it was over, she went back to treatment, back to the reality of a body that still could not be trusted, back to the life that existed on the other side of what the stage made people believe was possible. What the neon doesn't tell you. Here is what Las Vegas never puts on a marquee. The Strip does not distinguish between what it takes from you and what you freely give. It does not differentiate between a choice freely made and a contract signed by a woman who had never made a professional decision without a man 26 years her senior standing behind it. It does not care whether the instrument is a slot machine or a human voice. It cares about the extraction. It cares about the yield. Celine Dion was not destroyed by malice. Nobody sat in a boardroom and decided to ring a soprano until she broke. The people at Caesar's Palace fulfilled their contractual obligations. René Angélil fulfilled his role as manager and advocate, and by his own lights, as the man who loved her most and believed in her most, and wanted the best for her most completely. But the machine they built together, the $500 million machine with 200 shows a year, profit-sharing clauses, and a stage designed around her biology, that machine did not have an off switch. It had renewal options. And here is what makes Celine's story different from Benny Binion's story, from Frank Rosenthal's story, from all the other Vegas legends who built empires and watched them fall. The others lost casinos. They lost money, power, freedom, sometimes their lives. But they were always fundamentally on the house side of the table. They were the ones taking. Celine was always on the other side. She was the product, the offering, the thing Vegas sold to the world in exchange for hundreds of millions of dollars, the most expensive and elaborate human instrument the Strip had ever acquired. And like every instrument Vegas has ever acquired, it extracted from her until the extraction became visible. She is 57 years old now. She still speaks about wanting to perform again. She still speaks about the stage the way people speak about a home they had to leave behind. There is something in that, in the wanting, that is either the most human story imaginable or the most heartbreaking one. Possibly both. The Coliseum at Caesar's Palace still stands. Other names fill it now. The 4,000 seats still fill up. The lights still come up, and the music still starts, and the audience still leans forward in that particular way. That happens when something extraordinary is about to begin. But the woman who made the room means something. The woman from Charlemagne who sang her way from a 2-bedroom house with 14 children to the most lucrative residency in the history of live entertainment, she is somewhere in Nevada, managing her symptoms, watching the footage of Paris, and remembering what it felt like to stand in the light and open her mouth and make the world stop. The neon on the strip does not tell you about the body behind the voice. It does not tell you what 200 shows a year costs over a decade. It does not tell you what grief costs when you perform through it instead of sitting with it. It does not tell you what it means to have been shaped entirely by one man's vision of who you should be, and then have that man disappear while the contract continues. The neon just burns, bright and indifferent and beautiful, promising things it was never designed to deliver. Celine Dion gave Las Vegas a decade of the greatest live performances the city had ever seen. She reinvented the residency model. She filled a room built for her 4,000 times. She grossed numbers that had never been grossed before and set standards that the Strip is still measuring against. And Vegas gave her the $500 million. And then it gave her the bill. The house always wins, even when the house loves you, even when the house is the only home you've ever fully known, even when walking away from the house is the one thing you were never taught how to do. That was the story of Celine Dion and the deal that made her the Queen of Las Vegas. Which part stayed with you? Tell me in the comments. If you love discovering the real cost behind the neon, the price that fame extracts, and the people who pay it, hit subscribe. Every legend had a story, and Vegas never forgets.